What if I told you that one single belief is responsible for most of the suffering in your life? Not a belief about money, not a belief about success, but the belief that every thought that enters your mind must be true. Stay with me for a moment, because this realization has the power to completely change the way you experience life. Most people spend their entire lives listening to the voice in their head without ever questioning it. If the mind says you are not good enough, they believe it. If it says you will fail, they believe it. If it says nobody cares about you, they believe that too. And without realizing it, they allow random thoughts to become the foundation of their reality. The truth is that your mind produces thousands of thoughts every day. Some are useful, some are creative, some are logical, but many are simply reactions, fears, assumptions, or old mental patterns repeating themselves. Yet most people never stop to examine them. They treat thoughts like facts instead of possibilities. And this is where negative thinking gains its power. Imagine walking through a crowded street and hearing hundreds of different voices speaking at the same time. You would not believe every voice you hear. You would naturally filter them. You would decide which voices deserve your attention and which do not. But when it comes to our own minds, we often do the opposite. We accept every thought without question simply because it came from us. Even teachings from Shi Heng Yi often emphasize the importance of observing the mind rather than blindly obeying it. The mind is a tool, but many people allow it to become their master. The moment you learn to observe your thoughts instead of identifying with them, a completely different level of freedom becomes available. Think about how often negative thoughts appear without evidence. You make a mistake and immediately think, I am a failure. Someone does not reply to your message and your mind says, they do not like me. A challenge appears and your mind whispers, you are not capable. Notice how quickly the mind jumps to conclusions. Notice how confidently it speaks, even when it has no real proof. The dangerous part is not the thought itself. The dangerous part is believing it without questioning it. Because once you believe a thought, it starts influencing your emotions. Your emotions influence your actions, and your actions influence your results. A single unchallenged thought can create an entire chain reaction. Here is what mentally strong people understand. They understand that thoughts are not commands. They are not instructions that must be followed. They are mental events that can be observed, examined, and challenged. Just because a thought appears does not mean it deserves your trust. As you begin practicing this awareness, something remarkable happens. Negative thoughts still appear, but they lose their authority. Instead of saying, I am not good enough, you begin saying, interesting, my mind is producing a thought that I am not good enough. That small shift creates distance, and in that distance, freedom begins. Another important realization is that many negative thoughts are simply old stories. Stories created by past experiences, failures, fears, or painful moments. They are echoes from previous chapters of your life, not accurate descriptions of who you are today. Yet people often carry these stories for years, allowing them to shape their future. The more you observe your thoughts, the more you realize how unreliable many of them are. Some contradict each other. Some are based on fear rather than facts. Some are nothing more than emotional reactions disguised as truth. Awareness helps you see this clearly. Over time, your relationship with your mind starts changing. You stop fighting every negative thought. You stop panicking when one appears. Instead, you simply notice it, examine it, and decide whether it deserves your attention. This approach creates calm because you are no longer trapped inside every mental storm. In the end, one of the most powerful skills you can ever develop is learning not to believe everything you think. Because the mind will sometimes lie, exaggerate, assume, and create fear where none exists. And when you finally understand that thoughts are visitors, not masters, you discover a profound truth. Freedom begins the moment you stop treating every negative thought as reality and start seeing it for what it truly is. Just a thought passing through the sky of your awareness. What if the very thing you keep running away from is the thing that has been controlling your life all along? Think about that carefully. Most people believe that avoiding discomfort protects them. They think that if they stay away from difficult emotions, painful conversations, fear, uncertainty, or failure, they will feel better. But what actually happens is the opposite. Every time you run from discomfort, you teach your mind that discomfort is dangerous. And the more dangerous it seems, the more power it gains over you. This is one of the most brutal truths about the human mind. What you avoid does not disappear, it grows. The fear you refuse to face becomes stronger. The anxiety you constantly escape becomes more influential. The difficult emotions you suppress keep waiting in the background, quietly shaping your thoughts, reactions, and decisions. Many people spend years trying to escape discomfort, only to discover that they have built their entire life around avoiding things that make them uncomfortable. Look at how often this happens. Someone fears rejection, so they never express their true feelings. Someone fears failure, so they never take a meaningful risk. Someone fears criticism, so they hide their talents and remain silent. At first, avoiding these situations feels safe. There is temporary relief. But over time, that relief becomes a prison, because every avoided challenge reinforces the belief that you are not capable of handling it. Even teachings from Shi Heng Yi often point toward the importance of facing discomfort directly. Real strength is not built by living only in comfort. Real strength is built when you learn to remain present, even when things feel difficult. The Shaolin approach is not about eliminating discomfort. It is about changing your relationship with it. The truth is that discomfort is a natural part of growth. Every meaningful transformation requires it. Learning a new skill feels uncomfortable. Building discipline feels uncomfortable. Having honest conversations feels uncomfortable. Letting go of old habits feels uncomfortable. Yet these are often the exact experiences that lead to growth, confidence, and freedom. Imagine a person who wants to become physically stronger. If they avoid the discomfort of training, their body never develops. The same principle applies to the mind. If you avoid emotional discomfort, your mental resilience never grows. Strength is not built by escaping challenge. Strength is built by meeting challenge with awareness. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing that discomfort is a sign they should stop. In reality, discomfort is often a sign that growth is happening. It is the feeling of stepping beyond familiar limits. It is the sensation of your mind adapting to something new. But because discomfort feels unpleasant, many people mistake it for danger. As you begin practicing sitting with discomfort, something powerful happens. You start realizing that emotions are temporary. Fear rises and falls. Anxiety rises and falls. Doubt rises and falls. They feel intense in the moment, but they do not last forever. The problem was never the emotion itself. The problem was your habit of running from it. Another important realization is that discomfort often contains valuable information. Sometimes fear reveals an area where growth is needed. Sometimes anxiety highlights an uncertainty that requires attention. Sometimes sadness points towards something meaningful that has not been processed. When you stop escaping these emotions, you can start learning from them. Over time, your confidence begins to grow, not because life becomes easier, but because you become stronger. You develop trust in your ability to handle difficult emotions without immediately escaping, and that trust becomes a foundation for mental freedom. You also notice that many of the things you feared were not as overwhelming as your mind imagined. The anticipation was often worse than the reality. The challenge that seemed impossible becomes manageable once you face it directly. This is how fear loses its grip. In the end, mental strength is not about avoiding discomfort. It is about learning that discomfort cannot destroy you. And when you finally stop running, stop escaping, and stop treating every uncomfortable feeling as an emergency, you discover something life-changing. The door to freedom is often hidden behind the very discomfort you have been trying to avoid. And the moment you walk through it, you begin reclaiming the power that fear has been holding over your life for far too long. What if I told you that your mind is always growing something, whether you realize it or not? Every single day, every hour, every moment, your attention is feeding something inside you. The question is not whether your mind is growing. The question is what it is growing. Because whatever you focus on repeatedly becomes stronger. If you constantly focus on fear, fear grows. If you constantly focus on problems, problems seem bigger. If you constantly focus on negative thoughts, those thoughts begin to shape your reality. Most people underestimate the power of focus. They think their attention is harmless. They believe they can spend hours worrying, overthinking, comparing themselves to others, and imagining worst-case scenarios without consequences. But attention is like water. Wherever it flows, growth follows. Your focus is one of the most valuable resources you possess, yet many people give it away without awareness. Think about how a single negative thought can take control of an entire day. You wake up feeling fine, but then one worry enters your mind. Instead of letting it pass, you keep feeding it. You think about it again and again. You imagine different outcomes. You replay scenarios. Hours later, the thought has become much larger than it was in the beginning. The thought did not become stronger on its own. Your attention made it stronger. Even teachings from Shi Heng Yi often emphasize the importance of directing awareness intentionally. A distracted mind becomes a weak mind because it is constantly controlled by external influences. A focused mind becomes powerful because it chooses where its energy goes instead of allowing random thoughts to decide. The reality is that your mind follows your focus. If you spend your days looking for reasons to feel discouraged, you will find them. If you spend your days looking for evidence that you are incapable, your mind will collect that evidence. But if you begin directing your attention toward growth, solutions, learning, and progress, your mental world starts changing as well. Many people believe they need to eliminate negative thoughts completely, but that is not the goal. Negative thoughts will always appear from time to time. The goal is to stop feeding them. A thought only becomes powerful when it receives repeated attention. Without attention, it loses strength. Without focus, it fades. Imagine sitting beside a fire. Every time you throw wood into it, the flames grow larger. But if you stop feeding it, the fire gradually loses energy. Negative thinking works the same way. Most mental suffering is not caused by the first negative thought. It is caused by the hundreds of times you return to it and feed it with your attention. As you become more aware of your focus, you start noticing how often your mind drifts toward unnecessary negativity. You begin catching yourself during moments of overthinking. You notice when your attention is trapped in worry, fear, or self-doubt. And that awareness gives you a choice. Instead of asking, "Why do I always think negatively?" you begin asking, "What am I choosing to focus on right now?" That question is powerful because it shifts responsibility back into your hands. It reminds you that while you cannot always control which thoughts appear, you can influence which thoughts receive your attention. Another important shift happens when you learn to focus on action rather than worry. Worry often creates the illusion of productivity, but it rarely solves anything. Action, even small action, creates momentum. When your focus moves from endless thinking to meaningful action, your confidence begins to grow naturally. Over time, your mind becomes more disciplined. You stop giving equal attention to every thought. You become more selective. You begin protecting your focus the same way you would protect something valuable, because you realize that your attention shapes your experience of life. You also discover that peace is not always created by changing circumstances. Often, peace is created by changing focus. The situation may remain the same, but your relationship to it changes because your attention is no longer feeding fear and negativity. In the end, your focus is your power. It determines what grows within you and what fades away. And when you finally understand that negative thoughts survive on attention, you realize something life-changing. The moment you take control of your focus, you stop being controlled by your mind. Instead of becoming a prisoner of fear, doubt, and overthinking, you become the one directing your energy, shaping your mindset, and creating a stronger, calmer, and more purposeful life one thought at a time. What if I told you that one of the biggest reasons people stay trapped in negative thinking is because they keep introducing themselves to the world through their past? not with words, but through their beliefs. They look at who they are today through the lens of old mistakes, old failures, old heartbreaks, and old disappointments. And without realizing it, they allow experiences that happened years ago to continue controlling the person they are becoming. Many people do not suffer because of what happened in the past. They suffer because they keep reliving it every day in their minds. They replay mistakes. They revisit embarrassing moments. They remember failures more clearly than successes. And slowly, those memories stop being events that happened and start becoming identities they carry. This is where negative thoughts become dangerous. A mistake turns into "I am a failure." A rejection turns into "I am not worthy." A setback turns into "I will never succeed." Notice how the mind takes a single experience and transforms it into a permanent label. Instead of saying "I failed," it says "I am a failure." Instead of saying "I made a mistake," it says "something is wrong with me." Even teachings from Shi Heng Yi often emphasize that growth becomes impossible when you remain attached to an old version of yourself. Life is constantly changing. Every day you learn something. Every day you gain new experiences. Yet many people continue defining themselves by chapters of their life that have already ended. Think about how unfair this is. Imagine meeting someone for the first time and judging their entire future based on their worst day. You would never do that. You would recognize that people are more than a single moment. Yet many people do exactly this to themselves. They take one painful experience and use it as evidence against their own potential for years. The truth is that your past contains lessons, but it is not supposed to contain your identity. Experiences are meant to teach you, not imprison you. The purpose of failure is learning. The purpose of mistakes is growth. The purpose of challenges is transformation. But when you keep identifying with them, you stop learning from them and start living inside them. One of the most powerful shifts you can make is learning to separate who you are from what happened to you. What happened matters. Your experiences matter. Your pain matters. But they are not the complete story of who you are. They are chapters, not the entire book. As you begin understanding this, something starts changing inside you. The emotional weight of the past begins to loosen. You stop carrying old labels into new opportunities. You stop assuming that because something happened before, it must happen again. And you start allowing yourself to approach life with a fresh perspective. Another important realization is that negative thoughts often use the past as evidence. They constantly remind you of old mistakes to justify current fear. They say, "Remember what happened last time?" They say, "You failed before." They say, "You are not capable." But these thoughts ignore one important fact. You are not the same person you were back then. You have learned. You have grown. You have gained wisdom through experience. Yet negative thinking wants you to believe you are frozen in time. It wants you to believe that growth is impossible. But growth is the most natural thing about being human. Over time, when you stop identifying with your past, you start reclaiming your future. You begin making decisions based on who you are becoming instead of who you used to be. You stop allowing old pain to define new possibilities. And your confidence starts growing because it is no longer tied to previous outcomes. This does not mean forgetting the past. It means putting it in its proper place. You respect the lessons without carrying the burden. You remember the experience without turning it into your identity. You honor the journey without becoming trapped by it. In the end, one of the most freeing truths you can ever discover is that your past is something you experienced, not something you are. And when you finally stop introducing yourself to life through old wounds, old failures, and old mistakes, you create space for something new. You create space for growth, possibility, and transformation. Because the person you are becoming is far more important than the person you once were, and your future begins the moment you stop allowing your past to decide who you can be. What if I told you that the biggest difference between people who stay stuck in their mind and people who break free from it is not talent, not intelligence, and not even luck, but discipline? Most people believe they need to feel motivated in order to change their thinking. They wait for the right mood, the right energy, the right emotional state before they take action. But the truth is, if you wait for motivation to defeat negative thinking, you will stay trapped in it for a very long time. Negative thoughts do not wait for motivation. They appear randomly, unexpectedly, and often at the worst possible times. If your response to them is also based on mood, then your mind will always remain unstable. Some days you will feel strong, other days you will feel weak, and on weak days, negative thinking takes full control because there is no system in place to resist it. Discipline is different. Discipline does not depend on how you feel. It depends on what you have decided. It is the ability to do what is right for your mind even when your emotions are not supporting you. It is showing up mentally even when negativity tries to pull you down. And this is exactly why discipline is stronger than motivation. Even teachings from Shi Heng Yi often highlight that real strength is not found in temporary inspiration, but in consistent practice. A strong mind is not built in moments of excitement. It is built in moments of repetition, patience, and control over impulses. Discipline creates structure where the mind naturally tries to create chaos. Think about how negative thoughts operate. They are repetitive. They do not appear once and disappear. They return again and again, often in slightly different forms. If your response is inconsistent, those thoughts will keep overpowering you. But when your response becomes disciplined, something changes. You begin to interrupt the cycle. Instead of allowing a negative thought to grow, you challenge it. Instead of believing it automatically, you pause. Instead of reacting emotionally, you observe it. This repetition of awareness builds mental strength over time. It is not a one-time solution. It is a daily practice. Many people underestimate this. They think mental freedom comes from a single realization. But in reality, mental freedom comes from training your mind repeatedly to choose awareness over reaction. Just like physical strength is built through consistent exercise, mental strength is built through consistent discipline. At first, this feels difficult. Your mind will resist. It will try to pull you back into old patterns of overthinking, fear, and emotional reactions. But discipline is not about eliminating resistance. It is about continuing despite resistance. Every time you choose awareness over automatic thinking, you weaken the power of negativity. Over time, something powerful starts to happen. Negative thoughts still appear, but they no longer control you the way they used to. You begin to notice them earlier. You catch them before they grow. You interrupt them before they take over your emotions. And slowly, the gap between thought and reaction becomes your space of freedom. Another important change is consistency. When discipline becomes your foundation, your mental state stops depending on external conditions. You are not controlled by mood or environment anymore. You have a system inside you that keeps you grounded even when your mind tries to drift into negativity. You also start building trust in yourself. Every time you choose discipline over emotion, you prove to yourself that you are not a victim of your thoughts. You are the observer of your thoughts. And that realization builds quiet confidence that does not depend on validation or external circumstances. In the end, discipline is what breaks the cycle of negative thinking because it replaces randomness with structure. It replaces emotional reaction with conscious response. And when you finally understand that you cannot wait to feel strong in order to become strong, you realize something life-changing. The moment you commit to daily mental discipline, you stop being controlled by your thoughts and start training your mind to work for you instead of against you, creating lasting inner strength that no temporary emotion can take away. What if I told you that the peace you've been searching for your whole life is not something you will one day find outside of you, but something you slowly build inside you through daily practice, awareness, and discipline? Most people believe that peace is a destination. They think once life becomes easier, once problems disappear, once everything goes right, then finally their mind will become calm. But life rarely becomes completely problem-free. Challenges keep coming. Situations keep changing. And if your peace depends on external conditions, it will always remain unstable. Real peace is not something that arrives when life is perfect. It is something that grows when your mind becomes stable in imperfect conditions. It is the ability to remain aware even when thoughts are chaotic. It is the ability to stay grounded even when emotions are strong. And most importantly, it is the ability to observe your mind without being controlled by it. Many people misunderstand peace. They think peace means having no negative thoughts at all. But that is not realistic. The mind will always produce thoughts. Some will be calm, some will be stressful, some will be confusing. The difference is not in the absence of thoughts, but in your relationship with them. Do you become them or do you observe them? Even teachings from Shi Heng Yi often emphasize that inner peace is not something passive. It is something trained. It is developed through awareness, discipline, and repeated practice. Just like the body becomes strong through physical training, the mind becomes peaceful through mental training. Think about how most people live. Their peace depends on external approval, outcomes, and circumstances. If things go well, they feel okay. If things go wrong, their entire mental state collapses. This kind of peace is fragile because it is built on things they cannot fully control. That is why it disappears so easily. True peace begins when you shift your attention inward, when you stop constantly reacting to every thought, every emotion, every external trigger, and start observing instead. At first, this feels unfamiliar. The mind is used to constant engagement. It is used to reacting, judging, analyzing, and overthinking. So when you try to step back, there is resistance. But slowly, something changes. You begin noticing your thoughts instead of being pulled into them. You see emotions rise and fall without becoming overwhelmed by them. You start recognizing patterns in your thinking, and that awareness alone creates space. And in that space, peace begins to grow naturally. Another important shift is acceptance. Not acceptance of suffering, but acceptance of reality as it is in the present moment. Many people suffer because they constantly argue with reality in their minds. They wish things were different. They resist what is already happening. But peace does not come from resistance. It comes from understanding. As you continue practicing awareness, your reactions begin to soften. Situations that once felt overwhelming no longer disturb you in the same way. Not because life became easier, but because your mind became stronger. You stop reacting immediately. You start responding with clarity instead of emotion. Over time, peace becomes less of a goal and more of a state you return to again and again. It is not permanent in the sense that thoughts stop appearing, but it becomes stable because you no longer lose yourself in those thoughts. You remain centered even when the mind is moving. Another powerful realization is that peace is not the absence of life's problems. It is the presence of inner stability while facing those problems. This changes everything, because now you are no longer waiting for life to be perfect. You are learning how to remain calm within imperfection. You also begin to understand that external noise does not have power unless you give it attention. Not every situation needs your reaction. Not every thought needs your belief. Not every emotion needs to control your actions. And this understanding reduces unnecessary mental suffering. In the end, inner peace is not something you find at the end of a journey. It is something you build through awareness, discipline, and the courage to observe your mind without being controlled by it. And when you finally realize that peace is not outside of you but inside your ability to stay present, you discover a life-changing truth. The more you practice awareness daily, the less power negative thoughts have over you, until slowly your mind becomes a place of clarity, strength, and quiet stability that no external chaos can easily disturb.